Welcome back to the Study Shelf. You know the part of our deep dives where we really get to sink our teeth into some incredible literature.
Yeah.
This time we're taking on a true classic, one that I have a feeling holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts too.
Yeah.
John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men.
Oh, fantastic choice, Steinbeck. Always so much to unpack, especially this one.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you tell us a bit about what makes Of Mice and Men unique in terms of its structure? I know there's something special about the way it was written.
Yeah, you're right to point that out. Steinbeck himself actually called it a playable novel. He wrote it with the intention of it being both a novel that you could read and a play you could see performed on stage.
That's fascinating. Does that change how we experience the story then?
Absolutely. The way he structures the scenes, the dialogue, it all feels incredibly immediate. You can practically hear the characters speaking, picture the bunkhouse around them.
Wow.
It pulls you right into their world.
And that was intentional on Steinbeck's part.
Oh, completely. You see, Steinbeck was really interested in bridging the gap between what was considered high art and more popular forms of entertainment. He wanted his stories to be accessible to everyone, whether they were avid readers or preferred a night at the theater.
So he used this unique format to engage a wider audience. That's pretty remarkable. But let's talk about the story itself. The friendship between George and Lennie is one of the most memorable things about Of Mice and Men. Why do you think their bond resonates so deeply with readers?
It's more than just a simple friendship, isn't it? Their connection is this incredibly powerful symbol of hope. In the midst of some truly bleak circumstances. Remember, they're migrant workers during the Great Depression, a time of immense hardship and uncertainty. Their friendship provides a sense of belonging, of purpose, in a world that feels determined to isolate them.
I'm struck by how their dream of owning a small farm living off the fat of the land is so central to their relationship.
Right.
But knowing your circumstances, it feels almost painful to witness, knowing how unlikely it is to come true.
That's the genius of Steinbeck, though. He taps into this longing that's so universal.
Yeah.
This desire for a place to call home for security and stability. It speaks to the allure of the American dream, particularly during challenging times like the Depression, when that dream felt increasingly out of reach for so many.
And what about Lennie? He's such a complex and fascinating character. On the one hand, there's his innocence and childlike enthusiasm, but his physical strength and the trouble it unintentionally causes. It feels like tragedy is constantly looming.
Lennie is a really interesting case, especially given how he's often misunderstood. It's essential to remember that Steinbeck approaches Lennie's mental disability with sensitivity.
Right.
He's not a caricature or a stereotype,
Yeah.
but a fully realized character with both strengths and vulnerabilities.
Which makes him both endearing and dangerous.
Yeah,
Right. That tension adds so much to the story's overall impact.
precisely. He's capable of great tenderness, but also capable of causing harm, even if he never intends to. And that duality, that unpredictability, makes his character incredibly tragic and compels us to grapple with some difficult questions.
Speaking of complex characters, we can't forget Curly's wife. She's often dismissed as a troublemaker, but I've always felt like there's more to her story. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's too easy to label her as simply a flirt or a temptress.
Right.
If you look closer, she's a victim of her circumstances. Lonely, trapped in a loveless marriage, and with very few options in life, she's just as desperate for connection as George and Lennie, even if she expresses it in ways that are often misunderstood.
That scene where she confides in Lennie about her dreams, it's heartbreaking. It really forces you to reconsider her character and see her vulnerability.
That scene is pivotal. It reminds us that she's not just a plot device or a symbol of temptation, but a complex human being with her own desires and disappointments.
Yeah.
She's yearning for something more. But sadly, the societal constraints of the time limit her agency and ultimately lead to her tragic fate.
Okay, before we dive too deep into the tragic elements, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on Steinbeck's writing style,
Okay.
particularly the symbolism he uses throughout the book. What stood out to you?
Steinbeck was a master at using simple objects and settings to convey deeper meanings. Everything from the recurring motif of rabbits to the descriptions of the Salinas River Valley. It's all layered with symbolism.
Let's talk about those rabbits for a second.
Okay.
They seem so central to Lennie's world, but I feel like they represent something more than just his desire for pets.
You're right. The rabbits represent Lennie's hopes and dreams, his longing for a safe and stable life. They symbolize the unattainable, the fragile nature of hope in a world that can be so harsh and unpredictable.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is how they bring him comfort and joy, but also serve as a constant reminder of what he can't have.
It's almost like they're both a source of solace and a painful reminder of his limitations. Speaking of symbolism, the setting itself, the Salinas River Valley, seems to play a significant role. It's described as this beautiful, idyllic place, but there's also this underlying sense of menace, of looming danger.
Exactly. The setting becomes a character in itself, reflecting the duality of hope and despair that permeates the entire story. That contrast between the beauty of nature and the harsh realities of their lives adds another layer of complexity and foreshadowing to the events that unfold.
I'm also struck by how Steinbeck uses light and darkness throughout the story.
Yeah.
It feels very deliberate, almost like he's playing with our emotions.
Light often represents moments of hope, connection, and fleeting happiness, while darkness foreshadows tragedy, despair, and the harsh realities they face. It's a subtle but incredibly effective way to heighten the emotional impact of the story and create a sense of foreboding.
Like the ending by the riverbank.
Right.
It's both peaceful and incredibly sad. Lennie's gone. But there's also this sense of release, of a burden lifted, which is hard to reconcile.
That final scene perfectly encapsulates the complex mix of emotions that Steinbeck evokes throughout the story. It's heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time, speaking to the cyclical nature of life, the inevitability of loss,
Right.
but also the possibility of finding a strange sort of solace, even in the face of tragedy.
Man, Steinbeck really knew how to create a world that draws you in completely and leaves you feeling so many things at once.
He was a master of his craft. He gave us these flawed, relatable characters, a story that manages to be both timeless and deeply rooted in a specific historical moment.
Yeah.
And he left us with questions that continue to resonate long after we finish the book.
We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's so much more to unpack. Let's take a moment to gather our thoughts, and we'll be right back to continue this deep dive into Of Mice and Men.
One thing that struck me on my last read-through was, you know how much Steinbeck accomplishes without directly stating things?
Oh, yeah.
Like, for instance, he never explicitly says the story takes place during the Depression,
Right.
but he doesn't have to. The details tell us everything.
That's so true. The descriptions of the bunkhouse, the way the men talk about work being scarce,
Yeah.
you can practically feel the weight of their circumstances bearing down on them.
Exactly. And that makes their shared dream of the farm all the more poignant. You know, it represents this escape from that reality, a chance to create a life with dignity and autonomy.
Which makes their situation even more tragic because we know that even that simple dream is likely unattainable for them.
What do you think Steinbeck is trying to say about the American dream through their struggles?
He's definitely complicating the traditional narrative.
Yeah.
Think about how he contrasts the vastness and fertility of the Salinas Valley with the cramped, desperate lives of the ranch hands. The promise of opportunity is right there, literally surrounding them,
Wow.
yet it remains perpetually out of reach.
It's like he's showing us how systemic forces and social structures can keep people on the margins no matter how hard they work or how much they dream.
Precisely, Of Mice and Men forces us to confront those uncomfortable truths,
Yeah.
to see how poverty, disability, and social isolation can limit opportunities, even in a land that supposedly prides itself on equality and opportunity for all. And it's not just George and Lennie who are grappling with these limitations.
Right.
Look at Candy, for instance. His decision to give up his old dog.
Heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, but it also speaks to the tough choices people had to make during that time.
That scene is so powerful because of how much is left unsaid.
Yeah.
The quiet grief, the weight of that decision. It's a testament to Steinbeck's ability to convey profound emotions through restraint and subtle details.
It's interesting how Steinbeck uses those quiet, intimate moments to explore the theme of loneliness. Even within a setting like the bunkhouse, where these men are constantly surrounded by others. Think about the scene where Crooks, the stable buck, talks about his isolation.
Right.
It's a stark reminder that even in a crowded space, true connection can be incredibly elusive.
And Crook's isolation is further amplified by his race,
Yeah.
highlighting the systemic prejudice and discrimination that was rampant during that era.
Of course.
He's denied basic human connection and a sense of belonging simply because of the color of his skin.
Which, of course, reinforces the idea that the American dream was never equally accessible to everyone,
Right.
and that those inequalities continue to have a lasting impact, even today.
It's also worth noting that even Curly's wife, despite her social privilege as the boss's son's wife, experiences a profound sense of loneliness and isolation.
You're right.
Yeah.
She's trapped in this stifling marriage, denied agency, and treated more as a possession than a person.
Yes,
It makes her tragic end all the more devastating.
absolutely. And her death, while accidental,
Yeah.
highlights the inherent dangers of a society that devalues women, reducing them to objects of desire rather than recognizing their full humanity.
Okay, I have to ask about that ending,
Sure.
because it's one of the most debated aspects of the book.
Right.
George's decision to shoot Lennie. Some see it as an act of mercy. Others condemn it as a form of vigilantism. How do you interpret that final act?
It's important to remember that Steinbeck wasn't trying to provide a simple answer. He was presenting a complex ethical dilemma, leaving it up to the reader to wrestle with those difficult questions and decide what they believe is right.
And I think that's what makes Of Mice and Men such a powerful and enduring work of literature. It's a story that forces us to confront our own values and beliefs,
Yes.
to grapple with those shades of gray where there are no easy answers. What do you think Steinbeck ultimately wants us to take away from this story?
I believe he wants us to remember the importance of empathy and compassion, even or perhaps especially in the face of difficult choices and challenging circumstances. He wants us to see the humanity in those who are often marginalized and overlooked.
That's beautifully put.
Yeah.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Of Mice and Men. Thank you so much for joining us for this exploration of Steinbeck's powerful and thought-provoking work.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you.
And to you listening, we hope this deep dive has sparked new insights and interpretations of this classic story. What resonated most with you? What questions are you left with? We encourage you to continue exploring the themes and characters on your own and to keep those conversations going. We've talked a lot about the characters and the themes, but there's one element we haven't touched on yet. The role of fate in Of Mice and Men. Do you think Steinbeck believes in destiny? Or do his characters have any real agency in shaping their own lives?
That's a question that's been debated by scholars for decades.
Right.
There are certainly moments in the story where it feels like fate is intervening, pushing these characters towards a predetermined outcome. But there's also a strong sense of the characters making choices, often flawed and driven by desperation, that ultimately contribute to their downfall.
It's like they're caught in this web of circumstances, both internal and external.
Yeah,
They can't quite escape. Their dreams and aspirations feel so real and tangible, but the reality of their situation constantly undermines their efforts.
Exactly. Consider Lennie's strength, for example. It's both a source of pride and a constant threat. He can't control it, and it ultimately leads to tragic consequences. Is that fate, or simply a tragic flaw that he's powerless to overcome?
And what about George's final act? Was that a decision made out of love and mercy, or was he simply fulfilling a predetermined destiny? It's such a complex and unsettling moment.
Steinbeck doesn't offer any easy answers.
Right.
And I think that's what makes the ending so powerful. It forces us to confront the idea that even the most well-intentioned actions can have unintended and heartbreaking consequences.
Do you think there's any hope to be found in Of Mice and Men? Such a bleak and powerful story. But I keep coming back to that shared dream of the farm. Even though it never materializes, it seems to provide them with a sense of purpose and connection.
I think the hope lies in the human connection itself.
Yeah.
Despite the hardship, the isolation, the constant struggle for survival, George and Lennie find solace and meaning in their bond. Their dream, however fleeting, represents a yearning for something better, a shared vision that gives their lives a sense of purpose.
It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, human connection can be a source of strength and resilience.
Exactly. And that's what makes Of Mice and Men such a timeless and universal story. It speaks to the enduring human need for belonging, for purpose, for a place to call home.
Yeah.
Even if those dreams remain elusive, the act of striving, of connecting with others, offers a glimmer of hope in a world that often feels indifferent to human suffering.
What a perfect way to sum up this incredible book. Thank you so much for taking us on this deep dive into Of Mice and Men. It's been an absolute pleasure exploring Steinbeck's world with you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to you, dear listener, we hope this deep dive has enriched your understanding of this powerful story. Remember, Of Mice and Men is more than just a classic. It's an invitation to reflect on the complexities of the human condition, the fragility of dreams, and the enduring power of human connection. So keep those conversations going, keep those questions alive, and keep exploring the world of literature. Until next time, happy reading.